You think you know humiliation until your son forces you to apologize to his rich wife in front of her entire family for the crime of serving store-bought cookies. I'm a 69-year-old mother who raised my son in a one-bedroom apartment, and last Christmas he made me stand in a marble foyer and beg forgiveness from a woman who'd never worked a day in her life. What I said in that apology destroyed their marriage, their wealth, and every illusion they'd built. I don't regret a single word. Let me be clear about what happened. My son Derek married Vanessa 3 years ago, a trust fund heiress who thought poverty was something that happened to people in commercials. She'd been criticizing everything about me since the engagement, but last Christmas she complained to Derek that I'd embarrassed her by bringing homemade cookies instead of something from her favorite bakery. Derek called me at 8 in the morning demanding I come to their mansion and apologize to Vanessa in front of her parents, so I did. But the apology I gave wasn't the one he expected. I raised Derek alone in a neighborhood where gunshots were background noise. His father left when I was 6 months pregnant, and I never heard from him again. I worked as a grocery store cashier for 23 years. I stood on concrete floors for 8-hour shifts, scanning items I couldn't afford to buy. I wore the same 3 uniforms for years because new ones cost money better spent on Derek's school supplies. I taught him that character mattered more than money, that kindness cost nothing, that you measured success by who you became, not what you owned. Derek was a good kid. Smart, ambitious, hungry for more than our neighborhood offered. I encouraged every dream. I helped him apply for scholarships. I worked extra shifts to pay for SAT prep courses. When he got into business school, I cried for an hour in our tiny bathroom. He was going to have opportunities I'd never imagined. He was going to build a life I couldn't give him. I was so proud. He met Vanessa during his MBA program. She was taking a few classes for fun, something to do between charity galas and shopping trips. Her family owned commercial real estate across 3 states. Her father had never heard the word budget used seriously. Vanessa had grown up in a world where want and need were the same thing. When Derek brought her home to meet me, she looked at our apartment like it was a museum exhibit on how poor people lived. I tried. I cleaned for 3 days before she visited. I made my best meal. I wore my newest blouse. Vanessa smiled politely and barely touched the food. After they left, Derek called and said, maybe next time we could meet at a restaurant instead, somewhere neutral. I understood what he meant. Somewhere his girlfriend wouldn't have to see how her boyfriend's mother actually lived. They got engaged 6 months later. Vanessa's parents paid for everything. The wedding cost more than I'd earned in 5 years. I wore a dress from a department store clearance rack. Vanessa's mother wore something that cost more than my annual rent. During the reception, I overheard Vanessa's aunt ask who the woman in the cheap dress was. Vanessa said something quietly. They both laughed. Derek was across the room, didn't hear, wouldn't have said anything if he had. After the wedding, Derek changed faster than I could track. He started using words like portfolio and asset allocation. He got expensive haircuts. He wore watches that cost thousands of dollars. He moved into Vanessa's family mansion, a sprawling estate with more bathrooms than our old apartment building had units. He talked differently, dressed differently, held himself differently. My son was disappearing into someone else. The criticism started slowly. Vanessa would mention that my gifts were thoughtful, but perhaps not quite right for their lifestyle. Derek would suggest maybe I should call before visiting instead of just stopping by. Vanessa's mother made comments about Derek's humble beginnings like they were charming stories instead of my actual life. Derek would laugh along, distancing himself from the childhood I'd given everything to provide. Last Christmas, Derek invited me to their holiday party. Not a family dinner, a party. 70 guests, catered food, a bartender, a pianist. Vanessa had specified the dress code was cocktail attire. I didn't own cocktail attire. I wore my nicest dress, the one I'd bought for job interviews years ago. I brought homemade cookies because that's what I'd always done, what my mother had done, what felt like love expressed through butter and sugar and thyme. Vanessa opened the door wearing something that probably cost more than my monthly income. Her smile froze when she saw my dress. It completely shattered when she saw the plastic container of cookies. She took them like I'd handed her something contaminated. She said thank you in a voice that meant the opposite. His luxury life evaporated in 60 days. He called me last month. He said he'd lost everything. I said he'd lost it the moment he chose their approval over my dignity. He said I could have just apologized and none of this would have happened. I said if I'd apologized, I'd have lost myself. He asked if I was happy now. I said no, but I was at peace. I'm 69 years old. My son is 34 and starting over. We talk occasionally now, brief conversations full of things we don't say. He's learning to live on a salary again, to budget, to make choices based on necessity instead of want. Maybe he'll learn something. Maybe he'll become someone I recognize again. Maybe not. I don't regret what I said in that mansion. Every word was true. They needed to hear who Derek really was, where he really came from, what it really cost to get him there. If that truth destroyed his marriage and his wealth, then both were built on foundations too fragile to matter. You can't build a real life on shame and pretending. Some people think I went too far. They say I should have just apologized and kept the peace. But peace built on my humiliation isn't peace. It's surrender. I'd already surrendered enough. My youth, my opportunities, my comfort. I wasn't surrendering my dignity too. I still live in my small apartment. I still shop at the same grocery store where I used to work. I still make cookies from scratch because that's how love looks in my world. Derek's designer life is gone, but maybe now he has a chance to build something real. Something based on who he actually is, instead of who he was pretending to be. Let me know in the comments, what would you have done in this situation? And do not forget to subscribe to Golden Hair's Diary for more stories like this. She led me inside where everyone was holding champagne glasses and wearing clothes. I couldn't afford to dry clean. I spent 3 hours at that party feeling like furniture. People asked what I did. When I said I was retired from grocery retail, they'd nod politely and find someone else to talk to. Derek was busy networking, introducing Vanessa's father to potential investors, laughing at jokes I couldn't hear. He barely acknowledged me. When I finally told him I was leaving, he hugged me quickly and said he'd call soon. He didn't walk me out. 3 days later, my phone rang at 8 in the morning. Derek. His voice was tight. He said we needed to talk. He said Vanessa was upset. He said I'd embarrassed her at the party. I asked, how? He said the cookies were inappropriate, that everyone else had brought expensive wine or gifts from high-end stores, that my homemade cookies made it look like I didn't understand their social circle. He said Vanessa's mother had made comments. He said I needed to apologize. I told him they were just cookies. He said it wasn't about the cookies, it was about respect, about understanding their world, about making an effort. I said I'd made those cookies at 4 in the morning because I wanted to give him something made with love. He said love wasn't the point, presentation was the point, appropriateness was the point. He said Vanessa's family thought I was trying to make some kind of statement about their wealth. Then he said it. He said I needed to come to their house and apologize to Vanessa in person, in front of her parents. He said it would smooth things over. He said it would show I understood I'd made a mistake. He said if I really loved him, I'd do this for him. That sentence, using my love as leverage for his wife's ego, that's when something cracked inside me. I said I'd come. Derek sounded relieved. He gave me a time, 2 o'clock on Saturday. He said to dress appropriately. He said this was important for his relationship with Vanessa's family. He said he was counting on me. Then he hung up. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my small bedroom in my small apartment and thought about every sacrifice I'd made, every double shift, every skipped meal so Derek could eat better, every birthday where I'd pretended I didn't want anything so he wouldn't feel guilty about not being able to afford a gift, every dream I'd deferred so he could chase his. I'd given him everything, and now he wanted me to apologize to a woman who'd never struggled for anything because I'd brought cookies made with love instead of purchased with money I didn't have. Saturday came. I dressed in my best outfit. I drove to their mansion, 45 minutes across town to a neighborhood where the houses had names instead of numbers. The gate opened automatically. The circular driveway could have fit 6 of my apartments. I rang the doorbell. Derek answered. He looked nervous. He said Vanessa and her parents were in the living room. He said to keep it simple. He said just apologize and we could all move forward. The living room was bigger than my entire apartment. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, furniture that looked like it belonged in magazines. Vanessa sat on a cream-colored sofa wearing cashmere. Her parents flanked her like bodyguards. Derek stood beside his wife. I stood alone in the center of that massive room, feeling exactly how they wanted me to feel. Small, poor, inferior. Vanessa's father spoke first. He said Derek had explained the situation. He said they understood I came from a different background. He said they were willing to accept an apology if it was sincere. He actually said willing to accept, like he was granting me a privilege. Derek looked at me expectantly, waiting. Everyone was waiting. I looked at my son, at the boy I'd raised to be kind, at the man who'd become someone who forced his mother to apologize for being poor, and I started talking. I said I was sorry. I said I was sorry I'd raised a son who valued marble floors over moral character. I was sorry I'd taught him to work hard instead of teaching him to marry rich. I was sorry I'd wasted 23 years standing on concrete floors so he could stand on Italian marble and forget where he came from. My voice was calm, steady, cold. Derek's face went white. He said that wasn't funny. I said I wasn't joking. I turned to Vanessa. I said I was sorry she'd married a man so ashamed of his mother that he'd let her be insulted without defending her. I was sorry she'd never learned that love expressed through homemade cookies meant more than anything her family's money could buy. I was sorry she measured people by their net worth instead of their worth as humans. Vanessa's mother started to stand. I kept talking. I said I was sorry. Vanessa's parents had raised a daughter so fragile that grocery store cookies threatened her sense of superiority. I was sorry they'd built a world where kindness was less valuable than price tags. I was sorry they'd welcomed my son into their family, not because they loved him, but because his intelligence could be useful to their business empire. Derek found his voice then. He told me to stop. He said I was being disrespectful. I laughed, actually laughed. I said disrespectful was making your mother apologize for being poor. Disrespectful was valuing your wife's hurt feelings over your mother's dignity. Disrespectful was forgetting that everything he'd become started in a one-bedroom apartment with a mother who loved him more than these people would ever understand. Then I told them the truth. I told them Derek wasn't some self-made success story. He was a scholarship kid who'd gotten lucky. I told them his business acumen came from watching me stretch $30 across a week of meals. I told them his work ethic came from seeing his mother leave for work in the dark and come home in the dark. I told them everything impressive about Derek was built on a foundation of poverty and sacrifice that none of them could comprehend. I told Vanessa that Derek used to cry himself to sleep because kids at school made fun of his second-hand clothes. I told her he'd learned to hide his free lunch card because shame felt worse than hunger. I told her the only reason he knew which fork to use at their fancy dinners was because I'd checked out etiquette books from the library and we'd practiced with mismatched silverware at our rickety table. I told her the man she married was raised by a woman she'd just humiliated, and that said everything about her character. Vanessa's father tried to interrupt. I turned on him. I said his daughter had married into a family she looked down on. I said Derek had been so desperate to escape his past that he'd brought his shame into their home and asked me to perform it on command. I said they could keep their mansion and their money and their son-in-law, but they couldn't make me pretend that any of it was more important than the dignity I'd maintained through decades of struggle. Then I looked at Derek one last time. I said I'd given him everything I had. I'd sacrificed my youth, my health, my dreams so he could have chances I never got. And he'd repaid that by forcing me to apologize to people who'd never sacrificed anything. I said I was done. I was done pretending his new life didn't require erasing his old one. I was done accepting crumbs of attention from a son who was ashamed of me. I was done participating in his fantasy that he'd gotten here alone. I walked out of that mansion. Derek called after me. I didn't turn around. He called my phone 17 times that day. I didn't answer. Vanessa's father called Derek's boss, who was a family friend. That was 4 days later. The call wasn't to complain. It was to withdraw an investment they'd been arranging through Derek. Vanessa's father said trust had been broken. He said family complications made the partnership untenable. Derek's boss was sympathetic but clear. The deal was worth millions. Derek's family drama had cost the firm money. Derek showed up at my apartment a week later. He looked destroyed. He said I'd ruined everything. The investment deal had fallen apart. Vanessa's parents were furious. Vanessa was questioning the marriage. Her father was pressuring her to consider whether Derek's background would always be a liability. Derek said I'd humiliated them. I said he'd humiliated me first. He said it wasn't the same. I said he was right. What I did was tell the truth. What he did was betray his mother for social acceptance. He said, I didn't understand the pressure he was under. I said I understood perfectly. I'd been under pressure every day of his childhood. The pressure to keep food on the table. The pressure to keep the lights on. The pressure to make sure he never felt how poor we actually were. I'd carried that pressure silently so he could focus on school. He'd responded by asking me to apologize for not being rich enough for his wife. He tried a different approach. He said he was sorry. He said he'd made a mistake. He said he'd been trying to fit into Vanessa's world and had lost perspective. I asked him if he thought sorry fixed this. He said, what did I want from him? I said I wanted him to be the man I'd raised, but that man was gone. The person standing in my apartment was someone who valued wealth over integrity. I told him to leave. Vanessa filed for divorce 6 weeks later. According to Derek, her father had made it clear that Derek's liability to the family outweighed his usefulness. The prenup was brutal. Derek kept almost nothing. He moved into a regular apartment. He had to take a lesser position at a different firm.